The rain drummed against the windows of Hartwell and Associates as Sarah Matthews sat in the leather chair that seemed to swallow her whole. The mahogany conference table stretched before her like a chasm, separating her from her half-brother Derek and stepmother Victoria, whose perfectly manicured fingers drummed impatiently against the polished surface. Attorney James Hartwell cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the suffocating silence of the wood-paneled office. "We're here for the reading of Thomas Matthews' last will and testament, dated March 15, 2023. The words felt heavy, final, like dirt being thrown onto a coffin. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched her worn purse. 3 months had passed since her father's sudden heart attack. 3 months of being treated like an unwelcome stranger in what had once been her childhood home. Victoria's cold eyes bore into her, while Derek shifted in his expensive suit, barely concealing his anticipation. "To my son Derek," Hartwell read, "I leave the family business, Matthews Construction, along with all assets, properties, and the family estate." Derek's smile was sharp as a knife. Victoria squeezed his arm triumphantly. Sarah's heart sank deeper with each bequest. The vacation home in the Hamptons, the investment portfolio, the collection of rare books, everything went to Derek and Victoria. The room felt smaller with each word, the walls closing in like a trap. And finally, Hartwell paused, glancing at Sarah with what might have been pity. "To my daughter Sarah, I leave my father's toolbox, currently stored in the basement workshop." Derek snorted. "A box of rusty old tools? That's perfect." Victoria's laughter was like breaking glass. How fitting for the daughter who never amounted to anything. But Sarah remembered that toolbox. Remembered her grandfather's weathered hands teaching her to use each tool, his stories about building dreams from nothing. As tears blurred her vision, she wondered why her father had chosen to leave her the one thing that seemed worthless to everyone else. The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow as she descended into the basement of her childhood home for the last time. She was 8 years old again, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor while her grandfather, Pop Matthews, showed her how to properly hold a hammer. "Tools ain't just metal and wood, little bird," he'd said, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over construction noise. "They're possibility. They're the difference between dreaming and doing." Pop had built Matthews Construction from nothing in 1952, arriving in Millbrook with calloused hands and an unshakable work ethic. He'd constructed half the town's buildings before passing the business to Sarah's father, Thomas, in the early 80s. But somewhere along the way, the company had changed. Thomas had married Victoria when Sarah was 15, bringing Derek into their lives like a cuckoo bird in someone else's nest. The toolbox sat exactly where she remembered it, covered in decades of dust but somehow still dignified. As Sarah lifted the heavy wooden case, memories flooded back of summer afternoons spent learning carpentry from Pop while Derek played video games upstairs. "Your brother ain't got the hands for this work," Pop had whispered once, watching Derek struggle with a simple screwdriver. "But you, little bird, you understand that building something real takes patience." Sarah's relationship with her father had fractured after Victoria's arrival. Thomas, desperate to prove himself worthy of his young, beautiful second wife, had gradually pushed Sarah aside. When Derek graduated business school, Thomas handed him increasing control of the company, despite Sarah's architecture degree and intimate knowledge of the family legacy. The final blow came 2 years ago when Sarah suggested modernizing some of the company's outdated practices. Derek had laughed openly in the board meeting. "Maybe stick to drawing pretty pictures, sis. Leave the real business to people who understand it." Thomas had said nothing, his silence cutting deeper than any harsh word. Now, carrying the toolbox to her car, Sarah felt the weight of abandonment settle around her shoulders like a shroud. Her apartment in the city was small, cramped, nothing like the sprawling workshop where she'd learned to dream. But as she placed the toolbox on her kitchen table, something rattled inside, something that didn't sound like tools. Where are you watching this story unfold from? Drop a comment and let us know what part of the world you're joining us from. We love connecting with our viewers around the globe. The brass nameplate on the front read, "Samuel Matthews, Master Builder," in faded engraving. But beneath it, Sarah noticed something she'd never seen before, a tiny keyhole, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights staring at that keyhole. She'd turned the toolbox inside out, examining every chisel, every plane, every carefully maintained piece of her grandfather's legacy. The tools were immaculate despite their age, each one wrapped in oiled cloth and nestled in custom-fitted compartments. But there was no key. On Thursday morning, desperation drove her to Millbrook's antique district. If anyone understood old craftsmanship, it would be Eleanor Vance, whose shop, Treasures Past, had been appraising antiques for 40 years. Eleanor's eyes widened the moment Sarah placed the toolbox on her counter. "Sweet Lord," Eleanor whispered, running her fingers over the dovetailed joints. "This is Samuel Matthews' work, isn't it? Your grandfather was legendary around here. Master craftsmen like him built things to last centuries, not decades." She examined the nameplate with a magnifying glass. "This keyhole, it's handmade. Samuel would have forged a custom key." Sarah's heart sank. "Then it's lost forever." "Not necessarily." Eleanor's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your grandfather was paranoid about security? Had to be, considering some of the clients he worked for back in the day. Rumor was he did construction work for some unsavory characters in the 50s and 60s. Word around town was that Samuel hid things, important things, in plain sight." That evening, Sarah called her old college roommate Marcus, now a locksmith in Boston. "The lock mechanism is definitely custom," he confirmed over video call, squinting at the photos she'd sent. "But look at these scratches around the edges. Someone's been trying to force it open recently." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Recently? How recently?" "Within the last few months, I'd say. Someone was desperate to get into this thing." Her phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Heard you've been asking questions around town about Pop's old junk. Some things are better left buried. Trust me on this one." Sarah stared at the message, her hands shaking. Derek knew something. He'd always known something. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door to Sarah's old family home, stopped her on the street Saturday morning. "Your grandfather used to come by every few months," she said quietly, glancing around nervously. "Always checking on something in our old oak tree. Said he was making sure the insurance policy was still safe." In the hollow of the massive oak that straddled the property line, Sarah's fingers found a small metal object wrapped in waterproof canvas. Her grandfather's cramped handwriting on the accompanying note made her knees weak. "For my little bird. When the wolves show their teeth, this opens the truth. The foundation of everything we built together. Pop, if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that subscribe button and hit the like button. We're working toward 1,000 subscribers and your support means the world to us. Let's uncover this mystery together." Back in her apartment, Sarah's hands trembled as she inserted the ornate key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a satisfying click, and a hidden compartment slid open beneath the tool tray. Inside lay documents that would change everything. Incorporation papers for a second company, bank statements, and photographs that made her stomach lurch. The photos showed her grandfather shaking hands with men in expensive suits, men whose faces she recognized from old newspaper clippings about organized crime in the region. But it was the final document that made her world tilt. A deed to a property in downtown Millbrook, dated 1965, signed over to Samuel Matthews as payment for construction services and continued discretion. The property address made Sarah's vision blur. It was the lot where Millbrook's most prestigious shopping complex now stood, the same complex that Derek had been mysteriously able to purchase last year despite the company's supposed financial struggles. Sarah's hands shook as she spread the documents across her kitchen table. The deed was clear. Her grandfather owned the land beneath Millbrook Plaza, the crown jewel of Derek's recent business expansion. But according to public records, Derek had purchased the property from the city for a fraction of its worth, claiming it was abandoned municipal land. Monday morning, Sarah marched into Hartwell and Associates with the toolbox under her arm. The attorney's face went ashen when she placed the deed on his desk. "This is impossible," Hartwell stammered, adjusting his glasses. "The city records clearly show." "The city records are wrong," Sarah interrupted. "Or they've been altered." My grandfather paid for this land with blood money, and someone's been covering it up for 60 years. Hartwell's phone rang. Derek's voice was loud enough for Sarah to hear through the receiver. Is my sister bothering you about some fantasy inheritance? Because I'm telling you, James, any document she claims to have found is obviously forged. But Eleanor Vance's authentication report, delivered within hours, was irrefutable. Carbon dating, ink analysis, paper composition, everything confirmed the document's authenticity. More damning still, Eleanor had discovered something else in the toolbox. Photographs of the original land purchase, showing Samuel Matthews shaking hands with known mob associate Vincent, the builder, Torino. By Wednesday, Sarah had hired her own attorney, Patricia Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter and one of Boston's most aggressive property lawyers. This is bigger than just inherited land, Patricia explained during their strategy meeting. If your brother knew about these documents and proceeded with the plaza development anyway, he's committed fraud on a massive scale. The confrontation came at Derek's construction office Friday afternoon. Sarah walked in with Patricia and a process server, her grandfather's toolbox in hand. Derek was on the phone with investors when he saw her, and his face went white. What the hell are you doing here? Derek snarled, hanging up. Claiming what's mine, Sarah said quietly, placing the deed on his marble desk. Derek's laughter was forced, desperate. You think some old papers mean anything? I've got lawyers, Sarah. I've got connections. You've got nothing but delusions and daddy issues. I've got the truth, Sarah replied. She opened the toolbox and pulled out the photographs, including evidence that you knew about grandfather's deal with the Torino family, that you've been using mob money to fund your developments. Derek's mask finally slipped. You don't understand what you're playing with, he hissed. Some secrets stay buried for good reasons. The Torinos may be mostly legitimate now, but they don't forget. They don't forgive. Neither do I, Sarah said. The legal filing hit like an earthquake. Within hours, news trucks surrounded Millbrook Plaza. The headline in the evening paper read, Local developer accused of land fraud, mob connections. Derek's investors began pulling out immediately, and the district attorney's office announced a formal investigation. Victoria called that night, her voice venomous. You've destroyed everything your father built. Everything Derek worked for. For what? A piece of paper and some old grudges. For justice? Sarah replied and hung up. The investigation unraveled Derek's empire like a house of cards in a hurricane. Federal agents seized Matthews Construction's financial records, revealing a labyrinth of shell companies and suspicious transactions. The Torino family's legitimate businesses had been funneling money through Derek's developments for years, using construction projects to launder millions in questionable earnings. Derek's fall was swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, he'd been charged with fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. The man who'd sneered at Sarah's pretty pictures now sat in a federal holding cell, his expensive suits replaced by orange jumpsuits. His lawyers worked frantically to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Victoria disappeared one Tuesday morning, taking what liquid assets she could access and fleeing to her sister's house in Florida. She left behind only a bitter note. You got your revenge, Sarah. I hope it keeps you warm at night. But revenge had never been Sarah's goal. As she stood in the empty Matthews Construction office, surrounded by decades of family history packed into cardboard boxes, she felt only a hollow sadness. Her father's portrait still hung on the wall, his eyes seeming to judge her from beyond the grave. Patricia Chen found her there on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The plea agreement came through, she announced. Derek gets 15 years, but he's agreed to full restitution. The plaza property reverts to you, along with compensation for 60 years of lost rental income. You're looking at about $40 million, Sarah. $40 million. It should have felt like victory, but Sarah only felt tired. The transformation of Sarah's life was gradual but profound. The woman who'd once lived in a cramped apartment now found herself the owner of one of Millbrook's most valuable commercial properties. But more than that, she discovered her true calling. Using her architecture background and her grandfather's teachings, she established the Samuel Matthews Foundation, dedicated to preserving traditional craftsmanship and providing affordable housing for working families. The old Matthews construction office became her headquarters, but the culture was entirely different. Where Derek had ruled through intimidation and greed, Sarah led through collaboration and purpose. She hired many of Derek's former employees, good people who'd been trapped in a corrupt system, and together they began rebuilding not just structures, but the community's trust. Mrs. Chen, now in her 80s, became an unexpected ally and friend. "Your grandfather would be proud," she told Sarah one evening as they watched workers break ground on the first Samuel Matthews affordable housing complex. "He always said the measure of a builder wasn't in the size of their projects, but in how long they lasted and who they sheltered." The most painful reckoning came through a letter Derek sent from federal prison 6 months after his sentencing. His handwriting was smaller, humbler than Sarah remembered. "I know you probably never want to hear from me again, but I need you to know something. Dad knew. About the toolbox, about the deed, about all of it. He left it to you because he knew I couldn't be trusted with the truth. He spent his last years trying to figure out how to make things right without destroying the family name. I guess he decided you were strong enough to handle what I never could. I'm sorry, Sarah. For everything." Sarah read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in her grandfather's toolbox, now displayed prominently in her office. Forgiveness, she learned, wasn't about forgetting or excusing. It was about choosing to break the cycle of pain that had poisoned her family for too long. The final revelation came from Eleanor Vance, who visited Sarah's office on the anniversary of Pop's death. "There's something I never told you about your grandfather," the elderly antique dealer said, settling into the comfortable chair across from Sarah's desk. "He used to come into my shop every few months, always asking about you. He kept newspaper clippings of your college graduation, your first architecture job, every little milestone. He was so proud, but he was also worried." Worried about what? About what would happen when he was gone. He knew Derek was getting involved with the wrong people, knew your father was too weak to stand up to Victoria. He spent his last years making sure you'd have the tools to save the family legacy. That toolbox wasn't just an inheritance, Sarah. It was his insurance policy that the right person would eventually set things right. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the renovated workshop behind her grandfather's old house, now converted into a training center for young craftspeople. The smell of sawdust and wood stain filled the air, mixing with the laughter of teenagers learning traditional carpentry techniques alongside modern construction methods. Pop's toolbox sat in its place of honor on the workshop wall, its secret compartment now empty but its legacy living on in every project, every life changed, every family given a chance at affordable housing. The Samuel Matthews Foundation had become a beacon of hope in Millbrook, proof that sometimes the smallest inheritance could yield the greatest impact. Sarah picked up one of her grandfather's chisels, feeling the smooth wear patterns his hands had created over decades of honest work. In the distance, she could see the Millbrook Plaza, now renamed the Samuel Matthews Community Center, its shops and offices generating revenue that funded scholarships and housing projects throughout the region. Derek had been right about one thing: some secrets did need to stay buried. But others, the ones that mattered, needed to see the light. The truth about her family's complex history with organized crime remained sealed in federal files, but the good that emerged from that darkness now touched hundreds of lives. Her father's portrait hung in the foundation office now, and Sarah had finally made peace with his memory. Thomas Matthews had been a weak man trapped between impossible choices, but he'd made one decision right, trusting his daughter with the tools to build something better. As evening shadows stretched across the workshop, Sarah smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new opportunities to turn possibility into reality. But tonight, she could almost hear her grandfather's voice on the wind. "Tools ain't just metal and wood, little bird. They're the difference between dreaming and doing." The inheritance that had seemed worthless to everyone else had proven to be priceless. Not because of the money or property it unlocked, but because it carried forward the true wealth of generations, the knowledge that honest work, patient craftsmanship, and moral courage could build foundations strong enough to last forever. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of family secrets, hidden justice, and the power of legacy. If stories like this one captivate you, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales of historical intrigue and human triumph. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and tell us in the comments, what's the most valuable, worthless inheritance you've ever encountered? Until next time, remember that sometimes the smallest key opens the biggest doors.